Hello and welcome to the show. Now, my daughter has been choosing which subject she wants to study for her GCSEs, and they're the exams that children in the UK sit around about the age of 16. And to my surprise, one of the subjects she's chosen is history. Now, I never did get on with history at school, and it wasn't on my daughter's radar either, as far as I was aware. So I asked her why she'd chosen it, and she said, because I want to be able to learn from our mistakes. Now, to be honest, that was a pretty unconvincingly earnest answer from her. I think she just wants to do a subject with her friends. But in principle, of course, she's right. We should be able to look at learnings from the past and use them to help guide our future, growth mindset and all that. However, in general, learning from past mistakes does seem to be something of a problem for humankind. As George Bernard Shaw once said, if there's one thing that history teaches us, it's that we learn nothing from history. Thankfully, there are some industries that are very good at learning lessons from prior incidents. The aviation industry is a prime example there. But can the same be said for cyber and information security, or are we destined never to learn from our mistakes? Well, and speaking of not learning from prior mistakes, joining me today is, as always, Meta Compliance Chief Evangelist and author of Cybersecurity Awareness for Dummies, Robbie O'Brien. Hello, Robbie.
Hi, David. Great to be here. I'm a big history buff. Yes, always love history, and I think your daughter's right. Those people who ignore history are doomed to repeat it and all that good stuff.
Indeed.
I think history has great relevance to cybersecurity because really, in my opinion, I think this is an old problem. It's a problem called theft. It's people trying to take what you have. And that's why I'm really keen to have this conversation to our expert today, and look forward to talking to Peter.
Well, let's steal the focus away from you and turn it to our guest today. Our special guest today is former CID officer turned fraud investigator. It's Peter, the fraud guy, Taylor. Hello, Peter. Great to meet you.
Hello, and absolute pleasure to be on the show. I'm sure it's going to be an interesting conversation.
Well, as we always do on this show, we talk about information security, human side of information security, what it means for us as individuals and indeed for our organizations. And I'd love to kick off today, Peter, by hearing a bit about your story, about your history, I suppose. You've been on the front line of investigating fraud and criminality for, forgive me here, more than 40 years. And to begin with, of course, that
only
wasn't
just.
only just good.
Yeah.
But to begin with, of course, that wasn't in the digital realm. And that's not to say that, in the 1980s, there wasn't a digital realm or digital crime, but it certainly wasn't as commonplace as it is now. But the physical world and the digital world since then have inevitably intertwined during the course of your career. So kick us off just by telling us a bit about your journey in fraud and information security.
Yeah. I've always had a passion all my life about fraud. I suppose really that I've always respected and admired honesty and truth. And I've also seen in life that if people tell the truth, even if it's bad news, it's a lot easier to deal with it. So I've never liked deception, and I do think it would make the world a lot easier if people were sort of more ethical and told the truth. I ended up joining the police, loved my time in the police, became a CID officer. So I was dealing with all sorts of crimes, burglary, robbery, dealt with murders and fraud. I noticed around about 1987, 88 that there was I could see a lot of cars that were being stolen that weren't really being stolen. They were cars that had come to the end of their useful life. And I did a bit of research as a police officer. Went to my bosses and said, there's like a major problem here. These people are just fiddling their insurance companies. And the bosses weren't interested. Fraud was becoming a low priority because of other things that were going on in the world. So I actually decided to go and set up my own business, investigating fraud for insurance companies. The insurance companies told me that they didn't need me. The bank told me that there was no market for it, and there was nobody out there actually doing it. And then 18 months later, I had 22 people working for me, and
Wow.
I was working for five of the top 10 insurance companies, and we put in place a model to investigate suspect insurance claims, mainly around motor and accident, but eventually across all types of insurance. That is still in use now. Most of the special investigations units run by the insurance companies, run by claims organisations, are based on the model that I put in place, which was bringing people together with technical skills from insurance and investigative skills from policing and other types of law enforcement. And it's a very successful model. The model, as I say, the model's still going now. It's now become quite a huge industry. Obviously, it's become more sophisticated in terms of how it uses technology and everything else. And I then sold that business. I was still relatively young, and I got an offer I can't refuse, but in a nice way, not a mafia way. So I sold that to a large loss adjusting firm, and I ended up building my career within that large loss adjusting firm, becoming head of investigations and director of fraud management. I had a really good career, and then I set up my own consultancy, again mainly working on insurance fraud, but also corporate fraud, internal fraud, and things like that. And then about 2015, I got the cyber bug, because
Cyberbug. Oh dear.
yeah. Well, what I found was I kind of I'd always been an early adapter of technology. I love technology, wherever you can use technology to fight fraud, I was always up for it. But I then started to see cyber come into my world more and more. Well, certainly cyber-enabled crime. I decided to learn more about cyber. Decided coding wasn't for me, and things like that weren't for me. So instead of taking cyber exams, I actually funded my own intelligence project. So I did what I'd done when I first started off with insurance investigation. I actually did an intelligence gathering operation. So I went out and saw scrap dealers, motor dealers, found ones that talked to me and cooperate with me, and found out how insurance fraud worked. So I repeated that with cybercrime. And as I said, the intelligence project, it was for me to learn about cybercrime. So I actually advertised for former fraudsters that would be willing to speak to me. Advertised on social media and via the network had already built up. So as I say, I very much come from a fraud background, but I've also got a network and community within cybersecurity and infosec that I've got to know over the years. Where I've helped them with fraud issues and they've helped me with technical issues. So did the project, interviewed 10, it ended up being former fraudsters. I put conditions in place. The former fraudsters, one had to have been to prison. It sounds daft, but the reason for that is I wanted to know that they actually really were fraudsters, that they had a checkable background as fraudsters, so that I was more likely to be getting the truth. They had to now have not been in trouble for at least 2 years, and they had to declare that they were no longer involved in fraud or crime in any way. The other thing, one of the reasons why I did that is a lot of interviews get done with former fraudsters whilst they're still in prison. But I've dealt with informants, I've dealt with interviewing people in prisons. The problem with that is when you interview somebody who is in prison, they see you as a symbol of authority that could possibly get them parole or help them get out early or have an easier time. So it taints a little bit what they say. They tend to paint a much brighter picture of themselves. But I also spoke to people in cybersecurity. I spoke to people in counter fraud, and did other research. Went onto the dark web and started actually seeing for myself what the organised cybercrime gangs, how they were structured, and how they operated, what was on the forums. and I learned a lot about cybercrime. The other thing as well is that I had agnostic eyes, so I had no preconceptions about any of it. The only thing that I did know, which proved to be true, is I knew they would not be the same as what I was used to seeing. So all my life I've dealt with organised crime, from being in the police. And then you've got organised crime that focuses on insurance fraud. So I knew it'd look different, and it did. And then I ended up sharing that knowledge with technology companies, with fraud fighters, with some police forces, and they have all found it useful. And I go out and teach and train people to understand the enemy. It very much with cybercrime, it's about following the data and seeing what the data shows you and everything else. What I think needed adding to it, which I add, is it's all very well looking at what's happening to you, but you need to actually go and have a look at them and see what they're doing as well. You'll always pick up additional stuff and plans and everything else. So that's
Yeah.
my background,
Yeah.
and I'll come to do the job that I do now. So
It's fascinating in so many ways, and your experience cutting straight to let's speak to the criminals, but finding the structure around that, that's not something I suspect that many people get the opportunity to do, have the confidence to do, and have the experience in doing, who work in cybersecurity right now.
yeah,
And but
I think the
Robbie,
other one as well is you've got to stay safe,
well,
David, as well.
quite.
Yeah,
You're really potentially opening yourself up to risk there. And again, when you're working in the
mm,
physical fraud space as well, that's a
yeah,
different type of risk that you are potentially opening yourself up to than when you're dealing purely in the cyber or cyber enabled crime, as I enjoyed how you put it there.
yeah.
Um, Robbie, over to you here, because I know that obviously many of us have been operational one way or another in information security, maybe on the cyber side for a long time. But certainly Peter's background is different, I think, to many who work in cyber and information security roles now. But it strikes me that there's a lot of really potentially very helpful overlap, and that ultimately we're arriving in the same place, that cyber enabled fraud, given that so many organizations are almost entirely digital in many ways. What sort of things do you think we should be we can take away from Peter's story in physical fraud, and this arrival in the same place as many of us look at in terms of digital criminality?
So I think I'll start with the people that we deal with, the chief information security officers, the information security people. And having been in the industry like Peter for over 20 years, they tend to fall into two categories for me. There's people who've come up through the tech route, and they're interested in, vulnerability scanning, and they're interested in the technical perimeter environment. And then there's another group that have come to the industry via intelligence services or via police or via military. So you get people who have actually been in a real sort of antagonistic environment, and they're different mindsets. Niler's right, Niler's wrong, but it really has always struck me that the people who have come from working with, let's say, criminals or national players in real time are a lot more pragmatic, a lot more uh, cynical in a lot of ways. And then the people who come from the technology side sort of are looking for technological solutions to essentially a lot of human problems. So I think that's really interesting, and I think that the more that we can rationalize what's happening to people in this big change in cybersecurity, the easier it is for them to digest it. A lot of people, particularly small businesses, will have, sure, I have nothing to steal. I have nothing in my environment. And that's the fundamental first step for understanding what your information security management system should be, which is, what are your critical assets? What are your critical digital assets? And you protect those, because the reality is you can't protect everything. And I think if people think of it in a theft and a fraud mindset, as in someone will steal your IPR, someone will come and steal your customer list, someone will come and reconfigure your internal manufacturing plant and change the formula of your biscuits and poison people. Once you can put it, I think, into real things that people can get their head around, I've seen transformations happen, and it's critical when you're trying to change culture that you bring it into terms like theft, like fraud, like messing with your machines, messing with your configurations, because people can understand that. And largely, I think the vast majority of people understand the world we live in is digital, and there's lots and lots of real problems with cyber threats. The more that we can make it like it is always, same as it ever was, the more that I think we can get people to buy into it.
Peter, when we spoke before we recorded today, I remember you saying that you felt as though you were on the periphery of the cybersecurity community. You've been accepted by it, but you were kind of on the periphery. You are a fraud guy, not a cyber guy. I'm interested because clearly you work with organizations, you work with individuals, you work with lots of groups to advise them on risk and on cyber risk, and as part of that, I'm wondering, based upon your somewhat different background to other people who maybe also advise on risk as well, about what it is, how you articulate what it is that you bring that might be different or complements the other advice that organizations receive with regards to their risk. What is it that you think you are now able to bring based on your experience that maybe isn't what organizations might be getting through other risk advisory services?
Yeah, my focus is very much on fraud and what I wanted to do. When I got into the cyber side, I started to look at it. It's such a huge, such a broad church of occupations and everything else. What I didn't want to do was my message to become confused, or I didn't want to stop being the fraud guy and becoming the cyber guy. So I'm very much focused on the fraudulent aspects, and that my skills are based around fraud and helping people that have got, technical expertise and cyber security expertise when it comes to fraud issues or fraud related issues, as opposed to trying to replace them. So I'm there to back them up. And the other one is making sure that I know people that know a lot more than me about cybersecurity and infosec, and that I can go to, and that we can swap notes on. But I think the thing that I bring is the difference is I have adapted to a certain extent. I know, and I don't move. At the end of the day, what does we used to always say? What do the numbers tell us in fraud? And in cybersecurity, what does the data tell us? What are the facts? How do we? But you've got to be able to interrogate that data from an intelligent point of view and actually understanding what the story is. So, what is the story that's caused that data to be anomalous? Yeah, why are we having problems there? What's the story? What's going on? And I think the thing is that obviously I do things a lot of things like risk assessments, and risk assessments are common, across most industries. And the dead simple thing is that to start with, what is your risk? It's your threats versus your vulnerabilities, and everybody kind of knows the vulnerabilities. But a big gap that I do see in the market is people don't understand the threats. They've got anecdotal threats. They've got what they know, but they're not very good at establishing new threats. And I think it ties in with what you were saying, Robert. The most industries were very slow to realize how valuable their data was. Every industry, I think, is very slow to realize the value of their data to criminals. And criminals as well are very resourceful. So if it gets harder to get your cash, it's harder to rob a bank now than it was in the 60s. So let's find another way to rob the bank. Well, I know we'll fish somebody at the bank, we'll get their access, and we'll just take the money out of the bank, and then we'll move it, and it's gone. And there's no police chases, there's no armed police response units, and the other one is there's often no fuss and no hoo-ha, and a lot more money's taken. So the criminals themselves, they do. I sometimes argue with it, but it's inescapable that they are quicker to adapt and evolve than we are. I, I don't want to sort of sound all doom and gloom, because I think it's far from that. I think we will get control, of everything much, much better. You mentioned historically, looking back at history, the public access to the internet, mass public access to the internet, is only 25 years old, around about the year 2000. If you think back to 2000, most middle class homes and a lot of working class homes started to have a PC
Yeah.
that was connected to the internet via dial-up. And that was only 25 years ago. And now we've got iPhones, smartphones. Most houses have probably got 4 or 5 computers in them, in terms of laptops and everything else. So it's only 25 years old. And if you think of the car industry,
Yeah.
it took the car industry a long, long time to get safer cars.
Yeah.
And it took them a long, long time to get more secure cars. And that was all delivered through technology. And I think that the computer industry, the wider computer industry, it will become safer because things will be built in better.
Sure.
Use of technology is improving. And then you get hiccups. So again, looking at the car industry, it done so well. When I first started off investigating motor theft claims, there were over 1.5 million car thefts per annum in the UK. A few years ago, that was down to 80,000. So fantastic work had been done. And then we've got this little hiccup called keyless car entry that the criminals are exploiting.
Which is
Yeah.
a fantastically, endlessly interesting area, and that seems to be
Yeah.
rapidly evolving. Whether it's your sleeping key
Mm.
fobs that car manufacturers have brought in, or what we're seeing now with
Yeah.
headlights being removed and CAN bus injection and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
Fascinating.
Yeah.
You know what it's like, Robbie, when you say a word over and over again, and that word suddenly starts to just sound a bit strange, and you start to lose a sense of what that word actually means. I'm getting that with the word fraud. Now, I know, Peter, you're the fraud guy, and I know we're looking today at how we can apply the lessons that we've learned, maybe from a slightly different perspective, but in the industry in which we're most operational in right now. Robbie, I just wonder if fraud, how much of the criminality do we see organizations facing that we're trying to de-risk or protect from? How much of that do you think actually falls under the fraud umbrella? It strikes me that an awful lot of it does.
I mean, call me a cynic. I think the majority of it does. And I know there's other motivations, activism, there's national players, but I think the persistent, consistent, innovative stuff that the vast majority of us face is coming from people who are trying to take away what you have either organizationally or personally achieved. And I actually think that as we go forward, where a lot of people think, oh, it's all the one thing. It isn't, in the same way as, fraud in a bank. Having spent a bit of time a long time ago working for a bank, they had a department, an audit department, audit and fraud, whose job it was to go and find and investigate within their own environment. And I remember, I think we mentioned before, the concept that if someone didn't take holidays in a bank, they immediately were flagged with the fraud department that they were hiding something, which I always thought was fascinating. We don't have that concept within corporations. We don't, I mean, I'm not talking about holidays, but we don't have the concept that there is active, resourced prevention. We actually are focused on reacting to the things that are vulnerabilities. Yeah. We're reacting to phishing, and I think that's an evolution that we have in the marketplace. We're I think what we're seeing is the threats are becoming so pervasive and so painful for executive leadership teams, whereby the laws and the regulations are now putting the responsibility firmly on the individual. And if not that, if there is a breach, then there's possible, particularly in the United States, a potential litigation. And the litigating for the CISO is in the millions, because it's the SEC that's targeting you. So I think we're in an evolutionary phase, a brand new phase of maturity within corporate environments, and I see a natural move towards the concept of cybersecurity equaling same old fraud. I don't see it ever leaving the news anytime soon. But what I do see is it's separating into personal cybersecurity and corporate cybersecurity.
Things that are done haven't changed. So in our previous conversation, we mentioned the Nigerian 419 letters that were going out in the 50s, 60s, 70s, and 80s to people saying, I've got £1 million in the Bank of Nigeria. Send me 2,000 quid and you can have half of it. And really, at the end of the day, that's the basis for every single phishing email, every single phishing text message, and everything else. So again, I was having a conversation with one of my former fraudsters, and he embarked on a career of fraud. He was making a lot of money. He was causing a lot of problems. His gang were causing a lot of problems and a lot of embarrassment to the FBI and the US Secret Service. And he knew that it was inevitable that someone would come knocking, but they didn't.
Oh.
No one came knocking. But the factors that have changed things, obviously the internet is the the massive access that somebody from Norwich can steal from somebody in Nairobi, or rip
Vice
somebody
versa.
off in Adelaide or wherever. So we've got the mass internet access, and then we had what was called the dark web, as you know, or is still called the dark web.
Well, I wanted to come on to that specifically because this is a phrase that we were all captivated by, wasn't it? Maybe as long as 10 years ago, certainly in the 20-teens, but it doesn't seem to get so much airtime now, does it? And I wonder why that is. Is it still as relevant? Are criminals still hiding on the dark web, or are they just being a little bit more brazen now, do you think?
Well, this is the big one, really, David, is that the dark web, it used to be capital D, capital W, and you access the dark web by going through the Tor browser, totally unregulated. And you can, basically there are sites there to commit crime, for anarchy. There's other stuff as well. There's political stuff. There's stuff that's actually probably, quite, there's a lot of benevolent stuff there as well. But I think what's happened is, as we talk about the dark web now, it's become a small D and a small W, and it isn't just about that dark web that we access through the Tor browser. And it's a little bit like it became too restricting for a lot of the cyber criminals. They wanted recruits, they wanted victims, and everything else. So being in a restricted area, so it's a little bit like a zombie film where hell is full, so the dead will walk the earth. The dark web had reached its capacity in some ways, so they walk ClearNet, they walk the bright web now. So you've got them in Telegram, Twitter, LinkedIn. But when I talk about internet criminals, I refer to it as dark web activity. So it's the same as what goes on the dark web, but it also happens in plain sight. But also within, when you say plain sight, a lot of it is, the closed user groups. So you couldn't just go and have a look at what a particular group are doing today. You'd have to try and get accepted into that group. So the big thing that's happened, the biggest thing is, we've now got fraud regarded as a threat to national security by, and that, that's the US and most of the EU regard fraud as a threat to national security. It's now 40% of all crime. Back when I started, it was around about 1% of all crime. Well, that 40% has been particularly over the last 10 years, and even more so since 2020. And also a massive recruitment campaign from the cyber criminals to find other criminals. I mean, there's a whole market in training people how to commit fraud. So you can earn money by teaching them how to commit fraud, but also you can earn commission on the frauds that they commit. It's absolutely ultra capitalism, you know. Um, so it has just become so big and it's so huge and it involves so many people now. And that is the biggest problem of all. So technology has got to detect it, it's got to flag it, and it's got to prevent it. But there still does have to be the educational piece as well of actually telling people. And I think the government are actually now doing sort of campaigns. I've mentioned this to you previously. There's quite a lot of people that are actually stealing the data and selling the data who don't actually believe they're doing anything wrong.
Yeah.
So these are the different
because,
strata, the different tiers of criminality,
yeah,
aren't there? The different
yeah,
roles that people play in organized crime.
yeah. Well, within a typical marketplace, you've got people that sell the data. Yeah, so they collate the data, collect the data, steal the data. I mean, sometimes you say steal the data, they just go onto the website and download it because it's not been secured properly. So you've got people that sell the data, you've got people that buy the data and commit the fraud, and then the other activity is cashing out. So turning the ill-gotten gains into clean money. So those are the three key activities. Whenever there's a gap, the criminals fill it. Yeah. So if you can't afford car insurance, the criminals will sell you cheap car insurance via Facebook, but it won't actually be a valid policy. So they kind of like meet a need.
This
So
is
there's a lot
ghost
of that
broking,
goes
isn't
on.
it?
Yeah, it's called ghost broking. So basically, you give them the details. They may actually take out a policy, but they'll alter all your details so it's as cheap as possible. And then your insurance won't be valid anyway. Well, there's also, it started like that, but now there's a lot that you get a PDF document, but you're not on the motor insurance database.
I mean,
It's just a piece of paper. Yeah.
the bottom line, Peter, is just an awful lot of money to be made.
Yeah,
That's the
absolutely.
name of the game here. The name of the game is like the reason why it's hiding in plain sight, the reason why it's becoming even more pervasive in the last 5 years than it was before, is because they've made a ton of money.
Cash has become king. There's even rap songs that tell you how to commit cybercrime.
Wow.
Yeah.
This merger thing I've talked about, David, is it's kind of like some people think I've been really smart to have spotted it. I've just fallen into it. But the
Yeah.
merge between normal organised crime and cybercrime, the cyber criminals as well. It used to be very much around about carding and identity theft,
Yeah.
and that type of thing. But they're active now in tax refunds, grants, loans. They're doing all the traditional fraud things.
But
So the merge is, even closer than it was. And then the other one, there's actually a third merger as well, which is between the organised crime gangs, the cyber crime gangs, and the white collar crime gangs, where they're kind of coming together, and learning from each other. One of the consequences of that is if you look at something like ransomware, when I first started dealing with ransomware problems, a typical ransom was about 40K, 50K. But before I'd got into cyber, it used to be as low as 75. You used to send $75 to a post office box in Panama to get the key to get back into your system. And now you're looking at 4 million, 5 million. And they've learned that from the white collar
yeah,
side of crime. as I say, they're all learning from each other. And the other one that I'm seeing as well with organised crime and white collar crime, they've learned from the cyber criminals the benefits and ways that you can carry out detailed research on people. If you actually look at the high level burglaries that are going on, particularly around London, they're so well researched now.
Yeah.
And you've got teams coming into London to spend a week in London to commit burglaries, and they're not random, random acts of, that looks like a place we can burgle. They're properly researched who lives there, what they've got, what their assets are.
Using open source intelligence, often using information that we share about ourselves openly on social media and so on. And that is
Yeah,
manna from heaven for organized criminals who are going to target high net worth individuals, find out when footballers are playing in a European match and are likely to be away from home. There's stories
yeah,
about that all the time, aren't there?
yeah. But it's also, as well as that, other high net worth individuals, that are not even, they're not famous. They're just on really, really good money. And that's what's happening now across those three areas, the three areas that I see that all come under my remit,
Yeah. I want
or
to come back.
fraud. Yeah,
I want to come back to something that you touched on earlier on, and Robbie, this is around insider threat and about how this maybe has or hasn't changed over the years. Robbie, do you think having a guy on the inside is fundamentally the same as it always was, or has digitalization changed things, do you think?
So I think that you fundamentally have people on the outside of particularly bigger organizations are feeling around. They stumble across unsecured databases. Networks are segregated. It's much harder, and there's an awful lot of luck. But again, we're back to traditional stuff, and if you have organized crime where people have gambling problems, they have drug problems, they have whatever is the challenge, and they then have a person who is basically painting the picture of opportunity from the inside. And it's just, I mean, that's a gold mine for the adversaries that we have to deal with. And I think back to what Peter was saying, it's there's only upside from people who are making money out of this. There's only upside from the availability of different channels of research, taking old ways of scamming and robbing people and mixing them with new ways. There's only upside and only innovation, and you have to hand it to them. They're just coming out with new stuff on a daily basis. Plus, it's global, so if there's a new scam in Detroit, it won't be long until it's in London, right? The problem on the defender side is it isn't like someone comes in and steals the bars of gold out of Fort Knox, and you open the vault door and you go, oh, all the gold's gone. They could be in for months. They could be infiltrating your organization. And for the people who are on the wall trying to defend those organizations, the problem is that it's an invisible problem to the rest of the leadership team, and it's an invisible problem to the employees. And that, I think, is the big disconnect and the opportunity. So organizations are hoping for this problem to go away sometime soon, that the telecoms, the governments, the information vendors will create a way that will stop the criminals and the national players coming in and causing havoc. And the reality is that's never going to happen. It's going to get worse. And so, yeah, I think insider threat is, you have the insider threat of somebody doing something stupid, clicking on that phishing link, and we're off to the races. Or you have insider threat, be it activism, be it just somebody who's got a bad head on them about the company, or you have somebody who's compromised. So it's a real complex problem that is growing and becoming, I think, much more of a step change in the next number of years and in the last couple of years.
yeah. I think with the insider threat, first of all, data. when it's stolen, it's still there. If I steal your car, you've got an empty driveway.
Yeah.
If I steal your data, I'm not stealing it, I'm copying it. So it's still where it was. So people are unaware of it. If you've got um, a fairly sophisticated drugs gang and one of the members goes missing, they've got somebody in the telephone networks who do a triangulation for them and tell them where that person is so that they can go and get it. So if that drugs gang can do it, anybody can do it. And one of the people that I've interviewed and become fairly friendly with was involved in one of the largest authorized push payment gangs. And their whole structure included insiders, relied on actually having insiders who worked in the banks. It just had to, the system wouldn't, well, the system worked well because of it, as well as everything else. But when they were building the team, it's building that insider. But you've got two types of insider. One of whom is the person who is inside and then becomes corrupted or coerced. I think you can do a lot about that because usually there are other problems involved that have triggered that, unless it's an ideological thing. And I find that companies that have got good processes for support for staff, good training for managers to actually see that somebody's got problems. So if you've got a support structure there, you can actually cut out some of that risk. It will impact the risk. Well, then there are people that will deliberately take a job in a certain place because it will give them advantage. And even if you look at, the hugely successful Encrochat related operation from the National Crime Agency, they had a girl who worked in the National Crime Agency. She wasn't a police officer, and she warned two of her friends that the police were listening into Encrochat because she went to the gym with them. That's a story we've been told. There may be more to it than that. She may have been a deliberate insider. And she did work. She was a police civilian who managed to get a move into the NCA. And then rumours were as well that the NCA went right, did a really good job once they realised she was compromised and just brought everything forward and went out and did fun. I mean, I love the NCA. I absolutely love the National Crime Agency. They really are making a difference, and they really do make a lot of criminals sleep uneasy. But when you can actually get that happening in the National Crime Agency, then why can't you have? Then it's obvious it can happen in ABC Communications
Sure.
or whatever. You can do things like vetting and you can do regular checks and everything else, and all these things help. Well, the other one is being alert to be able to spot somebody who, maybe up to nefarious stuff. And the little things like, logging on the system at 2 a.m. in the morning, not taking the holidays, coming in on the day off. And I had one fraudster who was stealing data and selling it. And he used to come in on a Saturday. And everybody thought he was great. And he won employee of the month a couple of
Oh
times.
gosh.
Well, the reason he was coming in on a Saturday morning was that was when he was making about $4,000 collecting data that he could sell.
Almost out of time. I've just got a final question. So a final, very brief question or point to you both, really, and it's what you think. What's the top thing? If you could pick one thing that you think we can learn from the past, apply to the present to try and help keep our information, our organizations, whatever, secure in the future, what would that top thing be?
For me, it is really, really simple. And that is put your customers and clients before your own profitability. The example of that was the motor industry in the 90s, who were having that £1.5 million worth of, 1.5 million cars stolen every year. And the biggest problem with it was that they were spending £4.50 on lots.
Right.
And they didn't believe it was in their interest to spend £12.50 on lots. But once they realized, once they actually did that, then it made a significant difference and also gave people a lot more confidence. So there were certain cars that people wouldn't buy. So it's actually, taking a little bit more of a holistic view above your short-term profit, but that will give you sustainable long-term profit.
Robbie.
I agree with what Peter's saying. I mean, in the old days, we had safes, and strong rooms, and vaults, security guards, barbed wire fences, because everybody knew what they were what they were protecting. So work out what it is that's valuable to your organization, and then at the highest level, be responsible and spend the money that needs to happen to make sure that it's protected.
We'll call it a day there for now, gentlemen. Thank you both very much indeed. And Peter, what a delight to have you on the show today. Thank you for sharing so many absolutely fascinating insights. Where can people find out more about your research and about your insights online?
Yeah, the easiest thing to do is probably if you actually Google Peter Taylor, the fraud guy, maybe put UK because there might be other people, there are other Peter Taylors. I do put a lot of stuff out on via LinkedIn, and then I've got other things like podcasts and everything else. Always happy to connect with people on LinkedIn, or they can drop me a message. And I've got a website as well, but I won't bother reading that out. But if you Google Peter Taylor, the fraud guy, you should get plenty of places where you can get in touch with me.
Super stuff. And Robbie, storytelling is one of the ways that humans do learn from the past, and that's something that you continue to embrace at Meta Compliance with Cyber Police.
Yes. So anybody wants to find out more about how we address personalized security awareness, check out our website, metacompliance.com. Lots of information about how we help people with training on threats to their specific roles. And yes, there's rumors that there's a new series of our really successful Cyber Police Netflix style episodes. So yeah, that's coming.
Insider information there.
Yes.
And he's smiling as he says it as well. So there's definitely something dodgy going on. But yes, look forward to seeing season 3 of Cyber Police. But for now, both of you, thank you very much indeed for joining us. Thank you, Peter.
Thank you, David.
Thank you, Robbie.
As always, thanks, David.
And thank you all for tuning in today as well. See you next time. Bye-bye.
Bye.